I mean, it's not unlike when you bring a newborn baby home and you're just sitting there with this tiny, helpless baby and you're like, now what? Except now you're sitting there with your tiny, helpless self and you're like, now what?
Well, this podcast, it's amazing. Emily Garnett from Beyond the Pink Ribbon is on today to talk about living with metastatic, potentially terminal breast cancer. 1 year ago, less than a year ago actually, she was sitting around a table with multiple healthcare professionals after what seemed like a routine and quick ultrasound appointment to talk about her treatment options because they felt that she had metastatic breast cancer. She's 32. She has an almost 3-year-old. She's married and is trying to shine light and hope in a disease that takes the life of 1 in 3 women who have breast cancer. So please make sure that you are in a space where you can laugh and cry throughout this podcast. I wanted to bring her on because I feel like I want to know all about the journey of cancer. It affects so many women and so many families. She's honest, she's raw, she's real, she's funny, she's articulate, she's hopeful, and she's realistic. Enjoy this podcast. I am excited to have you here on the In Her Own Way podcast. We've met over Instagram. Was it through Katie? No, who was it through?
Yes, through Katie Widrick.
Yeah.
Yes, who is amazing and fantastic. And I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's just get into it because we were kind of talking about having you on the podcast and I thought, well, I'll go have a look at her Instagram profile. And the immediate response was, yes, now, when can we have you? And then we chatted before recording this, and I'm like, can we go out and hang out? Because we would
yeah.
hours about lots of different things. I love it.
But I do too. I really wish that we could. I wish that we could just, grab a cup of coffee and just talk.
And our kids so great. Okay, so when we're looking at your whole story, I'm just going to stand back and let you go for it because I think this is such an interesting topic. I only pick people who are interesting to be on the podcast because I think it's interesting and I'm sure that my listeners will as well. You're living with metastatic breast cancer.
That's right. Yeah.
In such a positive, encouraging, advocating way. So I want to know, how did this all begin? I know that you kind of fast forward, we're living in New York City.
Yes.
You were a lawyer.
That's correct.
Elder care and special needs law, which I think is fascinating. That could be a whole other 500 podcasts.
I know, right?
Yeah. And then you have a little kiddo.
I do. My little boy Felix is going to turn 3 in November.
Fast forward, you move house. So you move out of the city into the burbs.
That's right. We moved about 45 minutes north in the fall of 2017. So last fall. It was a year ago this week that we moved out of the city.
Just to kind of give our listeners a little bit, is that you had kind of chronic, intermittent, severe back pain for 2 years before you moved?
Yeah. Since my son was born, I had been having this horrible back pain that I tried all sorts of different ways to deal with. I tried exercising. I mean, I was not sleeping very well because I had a little kiddo who was not known for his stellar sleeping habits. So I wasn't sleeping well. I was a newish mom. I was chalking it up to that. I saw some doctors and they really dismissed me as, okay, you're a new mom. You have this big wiggly baby who wants to be held all the time. Your core is probably weak from being postpartum. Exercise, improve your diet. They really just blew me off. So I exercised, I lost weight, I gained weight, I did everything that they said, and the pain never really subsided completely. And we had no good answers for it, but I felt like it was just in my head at this point. Like I just needed to suck it up and say, like, this is going to be part of my life. Like this is just one of those unfortunate things that people deal with after having a baby. And that answer never really satisfied me.
So you move?
So we move with her, he was almost 2 at the time. And as soon as we moved, we started trying to get pregnant with the second baby. And I made an appointment with my primary care doctor. just to have a physical, make sure that everything looked good, talk to her about my back pain. And she was really responsive and ran a bunch of tests. We couldn't find anything. But in the process of her physical, she found a lump in my breast and said, "You need to get this checked out. I don't know what it is, but I'm not satisfied with just letting it be. Like, go get it screened." So she sent me for an ultrasound. Felix turned 2 November 6th. Our 5th wedding anniversary had been November 3rd. On November 9th, I went in for the ultrasound. And what I thought was going to be a really quick, 20-minute appointment. And I even joked with the ultrasound tech, hopefully next time I'm getting an ultrasound, there'll be a baby on the screen.
Oh.
And the ultrasound tech got really quiet. And she goes, "I need to go get the radiologist." And so the radiologist comes in. She's like, "I don't like the way that this exam looks. We're going to do some more tests. We're going to do a mammogram because it looks like breast cancer." And they did the mammogram. And she said, "We can't be certain until we do a biopsy. But if I were to give a percentage, I would say this is 98% likely that it's breast cancer." She's like, "There's almost no chance that it's not." And they did the biopsy and it was breast cancer. And they sent me to meet with the social worker and the nurse navigator and the breast surgeon and the oncologist and everyone that whole day. And, as you mentioned, I'm an elder law attorney, but my background is in case management. And so doing elder law and special needs law, you do a lot of case managing for people. I do a lot of guardianships. So my expertise gets called into play professionally when people are in crisis, when they're having a medical crisis or they're getting evicted or something is happening or there's elder abuse or their finances are being mishandled. And so for me, I just switched into case manager mode and I sent my husband out to go get a notebook in between the mammogram and the biopsy, because I told him, I was like, "We're going to be meeting with a lot of people. I need to be able to take notes." And he's like, "Who are you? I don't understand this."
I love
and
that.
I just put my blinders on and I was like, this is the time to focus. We got to gather information, figure out what's going on, figure out what questions we need to ask, what information we need, and who we're talking to.
I think we need to kind of decompress this for 1 second. So you go in for an ultrasound and the radiologist comes, then you have a biopsy, then you have basically a whole collaborative meeting with
right, the whole care team.
All the troops got called in and you're thinking, I'm just here for, a 20-minute appointment. I'm going to get my cup of coffee and go pick up my kid.
Yeah, Felix was actually with us because I had planned to take him to baby music class that morning. We were registered for a 9:30 class. We were going to drop my husband off at work and then go to this class. And I can't even imagine being in the waiting room waiting for your routine mammogram and having this 32-year-old coming out sobbing with her little boy who's toddling with her and her husband who's, we caused a total scene. I mean, it was really heartbreaking. I'm not someone that's shocked easily. And that turn of events shocked me to my core.
Yeah,
it took me months to play it back over and over in my head and be like, that's what happened. That actually happened to me because I really couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I totally get it. I want to unpack that in just a second, but I want to kind of fast forward chronologically. I want to swing back at those feelings because I think that what you hear, or maybe what I've seen a lot in breast cancer, is kind of not that unpacking of emotion. I think a lot of people talk about kind of where you're at now, the advocacy part. You spend a year kind of unpacking and aligning and going through that grief. But I haven't seen a lot of people talk about that grief, that initial immediate grief. And I think that that's what scares people is holy smokes. My whole life as I know it is just not imploded,
it's gone.
Radically changed.
It's gone.
So day one is an 11-hour circus. Everyone, all the troops came in, just absolutely land blasted you with a ton of stuff. And then you go home.
Yeah, then you go home. And I mean, it's not unlike when you bring a newborn baby home and you're just sitting there with this tiny, helpless baby. And you're like, now what? Except now you're sitting there with your tiny, helpless self. And you're like, now what? What do you do?
You have no answers. They didn't have it.
You have no answers. I didn't even have the biopsy results. You're just sitting there with yourself. And that's why I started blogging. And I've tried to record on my blog as much of the story in real time as possible. I think my first blog entry was like 2 or 3 days after that first diagnosis. Like I started writing that weekend so that I could record everything that was happening in as much of a real time chronology as possible, because I was like, so much of my perceptions on what happened are going to change, and I'm going to forget things, and I'm going to look back and go, oh man, I'm not going to have the appreciation for what I was going through at the time unless I actually wrote it down. So I did. I started writing it. I started getting that experience chronicled.
So that blog is called Beyond the Pink Ribbon. It's on EmilyRGarnett.com, but I will put that through. And you also have Instagram of Beyond the Pink Ribbon. So you have the 11-hour crazy circus. You go home, and then you have a PET scan.
Couple weeks later, yes.
Do you have basically like 2 or 3 weeks where there's no active treatment and you're kind of just...
It was like 2.5 weeks. I went in for my second opinion the Monday after Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like 2.5 weeks because I had been trying to get a second opinion with a really reputable breast surgeon in the area at one of the major cancer centers out here. And obviously she couldn't get me in for a few weeks. And because they needed all of the pathology reports from the biopsy and all of my imaging reports, and those weren't ready yet.
Tell me about that 2.5 weeks, that like in between.
It was like something out of a nightmare. At that point, I still thought that I was going to get a mastectomy and chemo. And I thought that I was going to be stage 2, get treatment, and be done. And I had no idea. I had mentioned my back pain to the oncologist and the breast surgeon, and they really kind of dismissed it. They didn't really think that it was anything that I should worry about or that it could be connected to the breast cancer. And the more that I thought about it, the more I was like, I have a feeling that I'm going to start getting answers very soon and that they're going to terrify me. Like in some ways, I just kind of knew in my gut that this wasn't all over yet. Like we weren't at the end of the diagnostic road. So when I went in for my second opinion, they sat me down and they're like, talk to me. And their course of treatment was very different already. So I was already like, okay, surgery is going to kind of be pushed back. We might do chemo. We might do, hormonal therapy. But I mentioned the back pain and they immediately jumped to attention. And they're like, okay, yeah, we're going to do a PET scan tomorrow. Like, we're going to check that out before we do anything, because to them, that was indicative of a potential bone metastasis. And spoiler alert, it was.
So funny. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, spoiler. It was the bad thing.
We should not be laughing when they tell you that you have metastatic breast cancer. Spoiler alert. I mean, if you don't laugh, you'll just cry, won't you?
If you can't laugh about it, I have to be able to laugh about it because it was like this comedy of errors. Like it was so bad. In hindsight now, I look at it and I'm like, how can you not laugh? It was crazy.
What you're going through is proper trauma.
Yeah.
Everything that you and your husband and your little kiddo had ever known. And also, we won't go into it completely, but for those, in Australia who have a free public healthcare system here and have the option to have affordable private health insurance, you're now being slammed with not only this medical diagnosis that is life-altering and life-changing, you now have to contemplate how on God's green earth are you going to pay for it?
Yeah.
The complexity in America for radical diagnoses like this is so much more intense because of the financial pressure. Whereas in Australia, I don't know if they would have gone as quickly. They may have gone as quickly, but you would have the option to go public. And so every single thing that you would have had done would have been at no cost to you. So you're having this whole cacophony of just everything, like everything you guys have known was just...
Our whole life was turned upside down. Yeah. And we had just bought the house too. Like we had just moved out of the city. We had just bought our first house. So we're not just in a okay, yeah, this is bad. We're in an, oh shit, we just spent all of our savings on our mortgage and our down payment. And because we had been trying for a second baby, we had kept enough for 1 year of out-of-pocket max because we figured we'd have to probably pay that in deductibles and premiums for a baby, for a pregnancy.
That is just crazy.
Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
So 2.5 weeks, you're thinking about all of this. You're like, we've got savings. It's going to be stage 2. Felix is
It's going to be okay. In a year, this will all be over. Yeah.
All be over. Everything's going to be fine. And then you go for the PET scan. So the PET scan is basically top to tail, top to bottom. They give you dye. And then if you have tumors or areas of cancer, because it metabolizes so quickly, it kind of lights up like a Christmas tree, essentially, is what happens.
Yep. And that's exactly what happened.
And you lit up.
I lit up like a Christmas tree. Yeah. I mean, you're not technically supposed to put up your Christmas lights before Thanksgiving, but this was the week after Thanksgiving. So I was good. So.
Oh my God, I love you. I should not be laughing because that's so terrible. But what else do you do? I mean, you have to.
What else do you do? Like, it was very festive. I mean, it was not the kind of festivities that I wanted, but it was the kind of festivities that I had. So I made the most of it. And by made the most of it, I mean, I crawled into bed for 2 weeks and didn't stop crying.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, right? Like, the reality is that you would be absolutely devastated.
I mean, I'm still pretty devastated. I don't want to downplay that in the least, because I had like a crying jag in the shower last night for like 20 minutes because I was thinking about the fact that I have another scan coming up, next week. And who knows if my treatment is still working. I hope it does. I think it is. I don't know. And if it's not, that's one less treatment that's available. That's 1 inch closer that I have to having cancer take over.
That would be the thing that when I work like as a nurse, and I think it's very easy sometimes to be very task focused as a nurse, like in, out, shower, obs, pain meds. And sometimes the thing that I love about nursing when I can have the time is actually getting to know people's story, because you may fly in and fly out of a hospital and you're just, patient number 35 and you're here for a scan and everyone's here for a scan. So you kind of learn to just do your job as a healthcare provider. Right. But the reality is that you're living with the anxiety pretty much every day of, is this working? Is it not working? And knowing that you may not have the amount of years that you had hoped to have with your family, or you may, but you don't know the answers to those questions.
We don't know. I mean, the likelihood of my 5-year survival is not in the 90%, but statistically like 40-ish%. Like, that's a really scary number.
It's scary.
On the other hand, there are advances being made every day, but the fact is that metastatic breast cancer doesn't get a ton of funding because everyone wants to throw money at keeping people not metastatic, which unfortunately is not really an effective use of funding because the rates of metastatic diagnoses have not really gone down.
Can you just explain to the listeners metastatic? So stage 1 is a localized area.
Stage 1 is localized. Stage 2 and 3 indicate either size and or lymph node involvement. Stage 4 indicates what is called a distant metastasis or distant metastases, meaning that it's gone beyond the breast, beyond the lymph nodes into another organ. Breast cancer really likes to hang out in bones, liver, lungs, and brain. Mine went to my bones, but it went mostly into my spine, which was not fun.
That's why you had the So you basically were living probably with breast cancer since you were pregnant.
That was probably the case, if not longer than that.
My Met is estrogen dominant, so the pregnancy...
It's estrogen positive, yeah. So the pregnancy probably kicked everything into overdrive. And my Mets ended up being in my spine, my sternum, my hips, and my ribs.
It's painful.
It's super painful. I mean, if you've ever had a really deep bone bruise, that's what it feels like. It felt like a broken rib because there's not much you can do to really treat it except with like narcotic pain medication, which, I did for the first couple of months because my pain was so significant. But, once the treatment started taking effect, my pain went down significantly and I felt much better.
So you get the diagnoses that you're stage 4 metastatic breast CA with Mets. So Mets mean like there's little clusters of metastases on different areas of your body, right?
Yeah, Mets is just shorthand for metastases, and that just means that there are tumors elsewhere, tumors not in my breast, but that is also breast cancer, since the breast cancer is the primary tumor.
Now, this is 2 days before Christmas?
I started treatment 2 days before Christmas. So I got the PET scan, I got the results, and then my oncologist wanted to do a bone biopsy before she started treatment to make sure that the lesions in my bones were of the same structural makeup, that it was the same cancer, not a different cancer, and to make sure that it was actually breast cancer because there was no chance it wasn't. So they did a bone biopsy on my iliac crest, which is like one of your bones where your hips and your back meet up.
Yeah. So that came back and then they started treatment 2 days before.
That came back and they started treatment about a week later. And then part of my treatment was going into chemical menopause. And that was not reversible. So any hopes of a second baby that we had were gone. And I received like a bone strengthening shot. It's just an osteoporosis shot plus. And 2 targeted therapies that target removing the hormones from my body, and another drug that's called a CDK inhibitor, and it targets a protein, I believe, that the tumors make. And so by forcing the tumors to stop making this protein, the tumors can't proliferate and then they die. And so it, at this point, has slowly shrunk my tumor burden quite a bit. We're hoping that it continues to do that.
That's a lot in 6 weeks.
Yeah, it was a lot.
This is what I think people don't understand is like the emotional load. I think what it does is you either sink or you swim. And the people that I see like online, there's another lady that I follow online who is also dealing, I think it's either breast or ovarian or uterine or something.
Yeah.
She has just taken the high road. They weren't going to do chemo. And then she decided that she was going to do chemo, but on her terms. So she doesn't have a PICC line. She doesn't have a port. She's like, you have to needle me every time. I mean, everyone's different. So you've gone through all the treatment. You've had a full hysterectomy. It's a salpingo
oophorectomy, which was my ovaries.
Like flamingo.
Yeah, I know. Flamingo oophorectomy. No, it was my ovaries, my tubes, and my uterus and cervix. And
they're taking that out because that's where all your estrogen's created.
They took the ovaries out because the ovaries are the primary estrogen generator, for almost all hormones. And then the tubes, because if there's any sort of cancer cells that are developing, they generally start in the tubes and then jump to the ovaries. And they took my uterus out because I had actually shown some precancerous cell growth in it. So they said, all right, no tissue, no issue. And they popped that out too.
So you're 33.
Yeah. And most of my lady parts are now medical waste.
I shouldn't laugh, but your spirit is so encouraging because one, I don't ever feel like anyone talks about this, or maybe I just haven't been exposed to it because I haven't had someone around me, as young as, like, let's talk about this. Like, let's talk about the devastation. Let's talk about this process because we need to have as much empathy as possible for people. So now all the lady bits are out. You're doing protein therapy. You're doing bone shots. Are you doing chemo, radiation? None of that.
No chemo, no radiation, hopefully no more surgery. Because chemo is not considered the first line of treatment with bone mets, especially with estrogen positive bone mets, because it's not only not as effective, but it really obliterates your system and really takes down your quality of life a few significant notches when they have these other therapies that are shown to be equally or more effective. And because the goal of treatment is not to eradicate the disease at this point, it's progression-free survival, they can allow me to be progression-free on these other drugs, but then chemo is still available in their back pocket.
So talk to me about your headspace around this idea of progression-free survival versus eradication. How does that feel to you?
I understand that that's where medical research is today and that there's nothing I can do about that that's the metric that the doctors work off of because they have to, because they don't have better answers. But it really, really pisses me off that we do not have better treatments for metastatic cancer, especially metastatic breast cancer, because it's the second biggest killer of women. I think it's 144,000 women die of metastatic breast cancer each year. 144,000. 100,000 women. And metastatic breast cancer only gets about 7% of funding directed towards breast cancer research. People don't die of stage 1 or stage 2 cancer. They die when it's become metastatic. And it's not just a small number. We're talking almost 150,000 women each year. That is staggering to me. And that's part of why I called my blog Beyond the Pink Ribbon, because I felt like it was so necessary to look at these numbers in their very ugly faces and say, what is a pink ribbon doing for this? What is a pink ribbon doing for me? And being very critical of a lot of breast cancer propaganda and pink ribbon propaganda, because it has very little to no impact on what is being funded, how things are being funded, and whether things are being funded appropriately. So if we're not going to be addressing those discrepancies, what good is the pink ribbon doing?
Interesting, right? Like, obviously it's raised awareness around mammograms and self-checks, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not against having mammograms, but there's a lot of research that mammograms don't catch very much. There's actually self-breast exams or primary health doctor exams. And they're even talking about re-looking at how they treat and doing less chemo.
Yeah, that's been the new conversation too.
They're over chemoing women in earlier stages. But what you're saying, though, is interesting, because not only are you dealing with the grief of having to like radically change your life and all of the other stuff, you've got a young kid and you're quite young, but then you kind of think, well, what about me? No one's having conversations about metastatic breast CA, because the reality is that you're trying to stop the progression of something that you can't cure, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't look as nice on a billboard, does it? You know, they're kind of saying like, give money so we can cure people. But what about the people who can't be cured? And what about putting money towards stopping the progression of a metastatic diagnosis, right?
30% of women with early stage cancer will go on to get a metastatic diagnosis.
Wow. So 1 in 3.
Almost. Yeah. So, it's not like these metastatic women are a small percentage. And I mean, I say women, men also get breast cancer, and I don't want to not address that. I say women only because by and large, this is the population that we're looking at. So you get this tremendous incidence of metastatic recurrence. And we're not looking at these early stage treatments that are getting so much funding being more effective than they were 10 or 20 years ago, because of the fact that we're still having these recurrences that are shortening people's lives. I like to say that it's not necessarily a cancer issue. It's a life issue, because if 1 in 8 women are going to be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lives, and then of that 1 in 8, 30% of those women are going to be diagnosed with metastatic disease, and 144,000 women are going to die each year of complications from metastatic breast cancer. You're talking about everyone's mother, grandmother, aunt, sister, daughter, teacher, nurse, doctor, lawyer. Someone in your life is going to be dying of metastatic breast cancer before you realize it. We can have all the awareness that you want, but until people are really going to put money towards metastatic research, those numbers are going to continue to shock and terrify people.
Yeah, and you had said that the rates of metastatic breast CA diagnoses have not actually dropped, or deaths haven't actually dropped.
Not really, no. That people are living longer, but we're also getting more diagnoses, and we're getting diagnoses in a younger population. Diagnoses in women under 40 especially tend to be a lot more aggressive. I mean, mine, hopefully, knock on wood, we're hoping is not showing itself to be super aggressive.
I know that the blog and the online space is a really positive place for you. What are your 3 things that keep you going? When you're comatose in the shower and you have that anxiety of the next scan, which is completely understandable, how are you keeping your mental health in check?
Ativan.
I love it. Let's just be honest.
Ativan. I mean, no, I'm totally not even kidding. Ativan, it's like Xanax, but it's faster acting. So I take my Ativan, which helps me sleep, because one of the symptoms of menopause and of some of my other therapies is really, really disrupted sleep. So I have to take a lot of sleeping medication if I want to function.
I actually want to say thank you for talking about medications because I just had an episode on where we talked about not using medications. And then I always think, and I've always said this, and I will always say this, that if you're in a mental health situation where you need to use medications, by every ounce of me, please use them because it's really important that you are mentally sound, like that you feel like you're coping at the very least. And I think that there is this kind of, I'm just saying a little bit of soapboxing. There's a little bit of a push sometimes that they're evil and that you should not use them. And sometimes I do think they're overprescribed, most definitely. But I do think that there's a time and a place for every medication. And I am grateful that you said that that's what's helpful because I feel like it gives women permission to say, you know what, right now I need this and that's okay. It may not be forever, but right now this is what's helping me survive and live a good life. So thank you.
Absolutely. To kind of piggyback on that, when I first got diagnosed, one of the first things that I did was call up my primary care doctor. And I was like, I'm very anxious, understandably, and I need you to recommend to me a good psychiatrist because I want to start talking to someone that is not going to let me slip down a rabbit hole. And she got me anti-anxiety meds, antidepressants, and works with me every month in counseling sessions and, with medication to manage menopause symptoms, to manage any symptoms of depression, any symptoms of anxiety. And so that any of those things are at a level that I can fully manage on any given day.
I love that permission. And there's no shame.
No, I fully credit that action and that ongoing effort to kind of make my mental health as much of a priority as maintaining my cancer treatment with my ability to function after this diagnosis, because I was able to say, okay, look, I know that I'm going to get really depressed. I know that I'm going to be anxious every single night because I'm going to stay up tossing and turning because I can't sleep. And I'm going to start freaking out that I'm going to die and leave my son. And I said, I'm not going to let myself live like that. And that is not an acceptable quality of life for me.
How has your relationship with your husband changed?
Well, when you're in menopause at 32, your sex life is not so good. I will just be fully honest with that.
I wasn't going to ask you, but I'm like, you are my kind of gal. You're like, let me just tell you how it really is.
It's hard, no pun intended. No, it's challenging, but one of the things that I'm always very, very proactive about is finding help. My cancer center has a sexual health doctor, and you better believe that I got her first available appointment after my diagnosis. I'm not kidding. So I have my psychiatrist, my oncologist, and my sex therapist who sat me down and she's like, let's talk about vaginal lubrication. And I was like,
oh my God, I love this.
And it's so important. And so we really had to find a new method of communication to be able to talk about okay, intimacy. I'm not dead. I'm still a person. I still have needs. He still has needs. We're still married,
Yeah. And you're young.
And we're young. And so we need to be able to recognize that and to take responsibility for that because it's not something that you can just write off.
And that would be really challenging, I think, as a woman. Women already have lots of roadblocks on intimacy and sex anyways because of our body image and our head space, right? If we're in our head, it's almost impossible to enjoy any sort of intimacy.
I had so many body issues before my diagnosis, and then going into menopause, I gained 30 pounds within a heartbeat, and that was really challenging. But on the other hand, being a cancer patient forces you to be very, very aware of your body space. And so you actually have this really wonderful opportunity to become a lot more in tune with your body. So I really always had struggles with my sweet tooth. And so now, because I'm so much more in tune with a lot of my other pain cues and tiredness cues and all the other cues that make me who I am, I have the opportunity to kind of relearn a lot of my hunger cues and, pleasure cues. And so in some ways it is kind of like this rebirth. And I'm not going to say, oh yeah, cancer is the best thing that ever happened to me, because hell no, like I'm not going to say that, but I am going to say that there were a lot of opportunities for me to rediscover different parts of my body and see myself in a way that I didn't really have the opportunity to see myself as before.
Beautiful.
So,
Obviously, like the sex stuff, I can only imagine that would be challenging. I mean, I really actually want to do a podcast on intimacy and sex for women because I don't think we talk about it enough. I love talking.
we don't.
I think it's
Yeah.
one of the most underrated things that we talk about as women because I think it correlates to so much of our mental health space as well. And also, I feel like it's a litmus test to a lot of intimacy, good or bad in marriages, like how it's used, how it's navigated. It's usually an indicator of where you are.
That's always been one of the biggest litmus tests for us, is that if we're getting overly crabby at each other, we're like, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
When was the last time we had sex?
Yeah, it's true. It's so true.
It's true. And 90% of the time, whatever we're fighting about isn't the actual thing we're fighting about. It's the fact that we needed to reconnect on a physical level. And that was what was important at the time. So, yeah.
I totally agree. I think that you just saying that is really important because I love that they have a sex doctor at the cancer place.
Oh, yeah. And she's awesome. And everyone should be seeing her if you're going through, a medical issue, because I think that, one of the things that I really appreciate at my cancer center is the fact that they are very proactive with addressing the whole person.
Yes.
Not just my tumor. They're like, you're still a person. And having a medical professional recognize that is so incredibly affirming.
I love that because you can just become a tumor. I mean, I think even in the medical world, it's like, oh, you're a tumor or you're, bowel cancer.
Right. Your diagnosis. But we're people. We're so much more than that. And I think it's really important to remember.
I totally agree. So how has the emotional load impacted your husband?
I can't really speak for him because he's had his own challenges and struggles with it, and he processes it so differently than I do. I mean, obviously, it's affected him in a tremendous way, but I don't really know how much. I can't really quantify or qualify exactly the way that it has, because he, I think, has had to step back from processing a lot until we got me more stable. So knock on wood that I continue to be stable. So it's, it's been something where you're in this months long triage.
Yeah, it would be something where you would both need to have a lot of support around you that you could process it.
Yeah. And we had family staying with us for a couple of months after my diagnosis because we needed to have the space to function. But we don't have local family. So we've really had to just rely on what we could cobble together ourselves, which has been really tough.
And how has it changed you as a mother?
I feel like I'm a better mother. I feel like and that was not an overnight change, but because I'm starting to be more patient and understanding with myself, I've become a more patient and understanding and empathetic mom, and that it's given me a lot more perspective, that I want to create a legacy in my little boy that, in his way of understanding and thinking and viewing the world, that allows him to kind of respect himself and respect the things around him and respect other people, and, know that he got that from his home.
That is beautiful. You are a light, and I think you are taking something that could absolutely devastate someone and allowing it to devastate you, but not consume you. And you're rising so beautifully.
You feel like in a lot of ways you're rising from the ashes, or when you're learning how to walk on hot coals, you just do it over and over again until it becomes commonplace. It becomes natural for you to be like, I'm going to put my feet on burning embers.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great plan.
Yeah, exactly. So Emily, where can everyone find you?
All right. The best place to find me would be on my blog, which is Emily R. Garnett, GarNett.com. And it's called Beyond the Pink Ribbon. You can email me at beyondthepink.ribbon@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at Beyond the Pink Ribbon. I'm also on Facebook at Beyond the Pink Ribbon blog and on Twitter at EMR Garnett.
Great. Emily, I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you so much.
And I just hope that it serves as many women or men as possible who may be in that 11-hour meeting. You know, they just got there. Families who just have to process someone in their lives getting through the 11-hour meeting and knowing that you can rise and you can be an advocate and you can make this journey however you want to make it. And it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to be real and honest and vulnerable.
And it's okay to feel shitty about it and to cry and to feel really hopeless because, you know, it's so important to me to like recognize and honor all of the emotions that I'm having. You know, it sucks, but feeling all of those things is what makes us human.
It does. And it also, ironically, I think personally, allows you to feel intense joy and love and intense light. Like you have this juxtaposition of complete tragedy, which then you allow yourself to feel. But then when stuff is so beautiful, it's like, oh my gosh, that sunrise is so beautiful because you are so open to feeling.
It's completely true. I completely agree.
Well, Emily, you are a gem. I'm so grateful for you. And I feel like we have to hang out, but I don't know how to get back to the States, but
yeah. Can we hang out?
Yeah, we totally can.
Yeah.
I just feel really privileged that you have shared this with us. And I know that there are people right now who are sweeping their floors or doing the laundry or driving their kids to school. And I think what you've given me is a really important perspective on the whole journey that's very honest. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining me today. If you'd like more information about myself, my journey, my public speaking engagements, or life coaching with me, please head to my website, mishpope.com. If you can kindly leave me a beautiful review on iTunes, I would be forever grateful. I can't wait to connect again in the next episode.